man.
So right before you came here, you hiked how far approximately?
Far today? We actually didn't get too far because it was the wetlands tour, so you're kind of swamp slogging, right? You're with rubber boots and you're with kids aged, broadly speaking, 3 to 10.
Right. So it's not like a distance thing. It's not like a marathon.
No. In total, I probably hiked only about maybe 5 or 6K today between the two tours.
But that was like all in nature though. Like you're on like pretty crazy trails. It's pretty wet out. Like so, it's April 3rd, 2022. Yep. Very soggy out, I'm sure.
Springtime. So that's why I allowed my feet to breathe coming in. I've transitioned to the socks and flops.
Nice.
I'm not trying to put my feet up on your table.
For anyone who's listening, watch the video version to see Owen's socks.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing pretty to smell probably, but they've been in rubber boots all day because that's the nature of what you're doing out there. And as you just said, it's spring, right, in southern Ontario. So late March, early April. It's really nice to get outside for a limited time for the wetlands tour and on my own spare time because I like it, but this is breeding season. This is when all the different creatures are taking advantage of those temporarily flooded spaces. The earth is kind of coming back to life. I think it's coinciding this year especially quite nicely with restrictions being lifted.
Reopening of everything.
I feel like Mother Nature and society together are kind of just going, and breathing out.
Yeah. Well, you said it's breeding season. Like for what animals in particular? Like because what is it? Is it bird season? Is it reptiles? Like I don't even know what do we have out here.
It's breeding season for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say for college kids. Like St. Patrick's Day was canceled for 2 years straight.
Exactly. It was probably extra rowdy.
Yeah,
but
Jacob Street was closed down again. Jacobson and St. Catherine's.
But they behaved themselves. Yeah. Now, apparently well enough this year. Now, speaking of not behaving themselves, though, the animals out in the forest, you got lots of frogs right now clamoring for breeding space in different pools and trying to find the right mate. You got salamanders doing that as well. You've got birds that are flying back from the southern states and even the neotropics of like Central America, returning to our Carolinian forests here. So there's a lot of action. There's a lot of things kind of coming back out to, they're rearing their heads again. And this is the limited time where you can go see those creatures because breeding season doesn't last forever. And then, as you know, the bush here gets full of everything from lots of green leaves, for one thing, but ticks and poison ivy and biting insects, all the things I personally don't mind. But as far as getting other people out to show them that, spring is the time to do it. So that's why I like it. It's my favorite time of the year, man. Like I said, it feels like everything and everyone is just kind of waking up together in spring in Canada.
Yeah, I guess it's exciting to see all the things that have been happening like behind the shield of the winter. And now finally seeing everything come out and start again for the year. I don't know. I've got to figure out soon when I'm going to plant sunflowers. The last 3 years, I've planted a field in the backyard.
There's some monsters here last time I was here.
Actually, our last podcast back in August 2021, we were in the vineyards. Huge. I think the tallest one is probably like 12 feet tall sunflowers. So I probably won't do those variety this year. I find to get like the most picturesque field, you need to get the ones that are like 6 feet tall, like the ones that when you and I are standing in them, we're just like at head height.
We're a part of them, yeah.
We become one of the sunflowers in a weird way. They are all my children, all 2,000 of them last year. But I want to go back. My reason I was asking about how you were going out and hiking today, like, do you remember? Well, one thing is like, do you figure like, or can you estimate like altitude gain that you did? Because I love like last year I ran every day 5K a day. There was a few exceptions, a few days where it was just pouring the whole time I had to make up for. But generally speaking, every day outside 5K. I didn't allow myself to do a treadmill. But this year I've become a lot more, accommodating with my running. So I've allowed myself to run on a treadmill. Instead of running outdoors, I've also allowed myself, rather than having to do 5K every day, I'm just recording all my runs and doing a 5K average every day. So some days I'll run 10, 15, 20K, and then I won't have to run for a few days. Okay. But I just love the contrast of like, so today I ran 10K on the treadmill and then did some weightlifting with, barbell and like Olympic weights. And it's funny, just like, I love the contrast. It reminds me of on Rocky. I forgot which one it was, the one where he's fighting the Russian or the Soviet. And there was the difference between the Soviet was inside. He was using all these machines. He had like all these doctors around him and they were like checking his vitals. He was using all sorts of like robotic sort of things on him, all these sensors. And then Rocky's outside in the field and he's like climbing hills and like doing the natural thing. So I just love like our contrast of like what we've even done today. Like here you are as the Rocky and I'm I forget his name. It's not Khal Drogo. It sounds like the guy from.
But you're the Russian.
Yes, the Soviet.
In today's day and age, sorry to hear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Rocky ends up winning in that one. I think the Russian ends up killing Rocky's friend. Great movie. I think it's Rocky 4 for anyone that wants to look it up and watch it. But is that like, I mean, you're an in shape guy. Like, is that something that you've ever had to like really look out of your way to try to stay in shape or to get in form, or is your lifestyle just so active enough that you've never had to put any real hard regimes or serious regimens?
It's a good question. I think luckily you already kind of hit the nail on the head. Luckily for me, well, first of all, my body is my tool. It's my ultimate work tool. So if I'm not in shape, for example, which I try not to slip into, maybe everyone got a little bit close during COVID times where they certainly went down the hill a little bit. But no, generally speaking, I gotta look after my body. I don't have a hardcore regimen, to be honest. I don't have a routine per se. My lifestyle, both at work and out of work, involves constantly moving my body in very kind of organic ways outside. Like, I don't know how to exactly quantify this, but wearing rubber boots and slogging through mud for a total of 4.5 hours today, I wasn't exactly breaking a sweat. I wasn't running up a mountain. I wasn't lifting Olympic weights, but that's exercise. Your body's constantly calibrating and using different muscles to stay balanced, and so I'm really lucky that I'm always moving. I usually always have weight on my back too, given the backpack and stuff, and so that's typical exercise for me. Every now and then I'd like to do it more, to be honest. I'll get in a groove where I'll be at home and intentionally like do weights, and we were talking about Netflix before you press start on the podcast here, but one thing I decided to do recently during COVID is if I'm going to watch Netflix, everyone does, let's be honest, I may as well be exercising while I'm doing it. Because like I find intentional exercise kind of boring sometimes, admittedly. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't stimulate my brain. And even good music sometimes isn't enough. So I like to occupy my brain while I'm just doing the exercise, and all of a sudden a full episode of good old Breaking Bad ticks by, and you're like, wow, I did like, I don't even know if I did like, 100 push-ups, or I did like 100 arm curls, or 100 squats, or whatever. Like just making those numbers up. But otherwise, man, no, I'm pretty lucky. I can balance that out with a nice beer and a burger at the end of the day too at times, but I like to stay active, and I think for me personally, and a lot of people I imagine, but my mental health is also proportionate to my physical health, and back and forth, right? So I'm lucky. There was actually a guy today on my tour. He showed up. He was a dad, and you could tell he didn't have any filter about it. I love this guy's honesty. He has a bunch of kids at home. One of the kids' name came out today. And he just said right off the bat, he's like, look, it was a busy day at home. I'm kind of cranky. And I joked with him, but not really joking. I said, hey, but don't worry. Every time you go into the woods, you step back out feeling better. And I think that's a pretty firm rule on my part. I can't think of a time where I've gone into the bush and then come back out in a worse mood. That's for sure. And he came back out, and what did he say? He's like, I really needed that today, man. Thanks so much. His 3.5-year-old certainly enjoyed it, but he got something different out of it. So again, exercising in nature, I think, is just it's healthy for everybody. Yeah,
I think most of the time, like, there's the odd time you go in and you lose a boot and you're unprepared and you're like, this sucks. Like, I'm covered in mud. Like,
yeah,
I think, it's just, but generally speaking, of course, I know that feeling of like being able to go out into nature and to finally be outside of like this hustle and bustle. Like, nothing worse though when you're going through a forest and all of a sudden you can hear the highway that's along it next to you.
Yeah.
But no, I just remember doing a little bit of reading and listening about how grounding is really important. So that's something to do with, I guess, having your skin actually touch nature. So whether that's your feet walking bare on the dirt or on the leaves of the ground, or even they say just the simple act of just touching the trees, as you're going around, can help you to feel like you're grounding back with nature. And like, so do you know what it is about that, like why humans might feel benefit from grounding?
Yeah, I do actually practice this on my tours sometimes. Of course, when the weather conditions are right. Grounding your bare feet when it's -20 would be pretty silly.
Yeah, not good, not terrible.
Unless you're doing the annual penguin dip here in town or something. But no, it's a really special feeling. There is a science behind it. It has to do with like electromagnetics, cellular connections, and everything, and also the very sort of molecules and makeup of the soil: the carbon, the phosphorus, the nitrogen, and the countless molecules that science hasn't even picked up on that are in the soil. So, for example, where I was today, that soil is more or less, you could say, 12,000 years old. There's been trees falling over and rotting in that soil and growing more trees for a cycle of nearly 12,000 years since the last glacier left. And so there's a scientific aspect to letting our body's senses, like human beings are finely tuned machines. And I always say it's a shame when we don't tap into the senses more often. our skin is the ultimate sensory organ. It's the largest organ in our body, right?
Yeah.
I skipped a couple inappropriate jokes there, but but long and the short of it is when you get those skin cells doing what they're humanly meant to do, exposed to sun, mud, dirt, water, etc., it feels good. So there's the science behind it, the actual chemical reactions, but then there's the psychological component too.
Yeah.
We live a lot of our lives very blockaded. Gloves, clothing. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so grounding's pretty cool. It's not something I do on every tour or every time I go out, but it's nice. Like yesterday on one of my tours, it was a lot sunnier than today, and I had the kids I was like, hey, take your gloves off and put your hand down on the forest floor on this dry section of leaves. And I was like, do you feel that it's cooler or warmer than everything we've walked through today? And naturally, it's about 5 degrees warmer on the forest floor.
Yesterday.
You got it. And basically I said, like this is like the different energy kind of on the ground here. And the animals pick up on that too. So even though it's cold outside and we're wearing toques and wintry kind of jackets, I bet you we could see a snake today because it's going to come out and warm itself here. So for those kids to kind of stop, take that one conscious moment, put their hand down and say yeah, it is warmer. And it's undeniable. You do feel it. And then about 20 minutes later, on a cold day, we saw a snake basking on the forest floor on one of those warm, dry areas. And it's just like, it's just a cool kind of area to explore. Even just the kids putting their hands on the moss, like you said, and just, I don't know. Again, there's science, but there's also a spiritual component, if you will, too, where I like to picture it as like this volt, this recharge. Well, it's special.
Well, it's funny, so it makes me think of I was at my friend Adam's house the other day, and his dog liked to hang out in the furnace room, and it's like, I get it, it's warmer in there.
Yeah.
Or if my dad's dog is a little too overheated, you could tell because he goes and lays on the cold floor of the laundry room. It's like a ceramic floor.
Yep.
And but one thing I've heard as well is that grounding, in the sense of like you touching soil in particular, maybe there's must also be for trees and everything else that's connected to nature or going into a forest. It's also about having your microbiome or your microorganisms that are covered in your body and within your body to basically have them interact with the soil and the earth around them. I mean, every kind of, I mean, I'm no Dr. Fauci, but I know like every kind of pathogen has some sort of a connection to the environment that it spreads through, and I think there's some sort of a benefit, and again, not a doctor, but I've heard that there's a benefit to people being able to reconnect with nature in the sense that there's something in their body that allows them to, I don't know if it's that they're gaining something that helps their immune system, or if it's just something that, whether it's an immune system thing or just for the overall function of the human body, needs to be exposed to different bacteria and different microorganisms that are well beyond my comprehension.
Well, yeah, and that's just it. I think, both of us probably have the same extent of knowledge, but I know for a fact that there is peer-reviewed literature out there that explains the psychological and biological effects of humans exposing themselves to nature, whether it's something as direct as grounding or just simply standing out in that woodlot behind your house, for example, for a few minutes or something. And they talk about how it starts to pump different chemical signals to your body, like different hormones, so like and whatnot. So, or I guess the word I'm looking for is endorphins. So like your serotonin kind of gets pumping through a little bit too. But those happy molecules, right? They actually make you feel happier. There's all kinds of scientific studies that point to lowering your blood pressure, reducing anxiety, basically just increasing your breathing quality and rate of breathing. So it does happen. And I wonder if it happens to a lot of people subconsciously. You don't even know it. But I think if you're actually looking to feel that out, you will. Yeah.
It's funny how like it was right when COVID hit, of course, we didn't know what it was. Everyone thought it could have been SARS 2.0. And most of the major world governments or Western governments said, everyone stay at home, don't go outside, don't get sunlight, don't go. In California, I know they made it illegal for you to go to certain beaches, public beaches. So
briefly, Florida did too.
They arrested a guy who was wakeboarding, or he was paddleboarding, and they used government tax paid boats to go out there and to arrest a guy or to take a guy out of a park who was literally miles away from people by himself. And they're now coming into contact with this guy because he's on the ocean in front of a park that's closed. Like, just insanity. And I don't know. I get it. Government moves at you always hear of snail's pace. It moves at 100 miles an hour though in the age of COVID and
when it wants to, yeah.
Yeah, and how you never really saw. I mean, maybe some people have, and I just missed it. But there's no general message of like we were wrong. Like we should not have done that. Like we learn from our mistakes. I mean, we see it in new newer, I guess newer legislation or newer rules. I mean, even though there is the risk of another wave right now with our favorite word, coronavirus. I think they're. I forget if it's the 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th wave they're calling it.
Apparently it's 6th.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Perfect. We'll mark the calendar. And and it's interesting to show that by this point they're saying, okay, fair enough. Like there's still no vaccine mandates. There's for going into restaurants, the things that most people would see day to day. Mask requirements dropped in most settings and things like that.
Yeah.
So there has been some evolution, but I wish there was a little bit more of like a. You don't have to say we fucked up, but something of like we learned along the way and let's move forward. Because what happens is they're just people run on the momentum of the media. They run out the momentum of the times, and it's just like, all right, well, let's just assume things have changed now and let's just move forward. But I know that's a rabbit hole in itself, going into all the missteps and I don't want to be Sunday. What do they call it? Like Sunday afternoon quarterbacking or Monday afternoon when you come back and you say, well, if that was me, it's like, well, yeah, after the fact. I mean, hindsight is 2020. But yeah, as you said, I'm happy that we're finally back to allowing people to go outside and to get to enjoy nature. And one thing I wanted to ask, because I know you've been heavily involved with, or just have been in constant contact with a lot of our parks and open spaces. Now, what's the general trend? I know I'm kind of intentionally asking this vaguely, but have you seen that there's been a lot more people going into these parks and places when COVID started? Has this changed throughout COVID? What are you seeing now that's changed now that things are opening up across the board?
Yeah, that's a really valid question, and and for the past 2 years, as you mentioned, like it's so easy to, and we talk about anything COVID related, but at the same time, in all fairness, it's so enormous that it literally infiltrates every aspect of life. And what was kind of wild for me to observe was it literally infiltrated, even how people got outdoors. We're just another species, and we're animals, as much as the traveling blackbirds of your window do, or the frog and the fish across the street. And when we put under certain pressure or changing circumstances, we're going to react. So what happened, especially early 2020, when COVID had hysteria on the rise, the biggest wave, we were in hard lockdown, all that fun stuff. People ran out of their original, for a brief period of time, they ran out of their original kind of crutches or go-to or hobby. Maybe it was going to the gym, maybe it was going to the theater, maybe it was going up next week to grab a beer and a burger at your local pub and socialize, maybe it was clubbing every weekend, or you play sports. There's so many things, or a club, and all of a sudden all of that was virtually removed and made out to be very scary for a brief period of time. So people flock to the outdoors. Try to picture this on a graph of how many people got outside and engaged in nature. 2020 was hands down the busiest because people were like, what else is there to do?
Yeah, the malls
and then
are closed.
Then you add a school closure, multiple, I should add, school closures on top of that. You got parents going, I don't want my, well, at least some would have totally catered to the times and probably stayed indoors.
Netflix,
yeah.
Uber Eats.
Here, kid, here's a screen. Yeah, Uber Eats, don't leave the house, etc. Teach their own, whatever.
Yeah, but, not my kids.
But there's also a lot of parents who are like, no, I know things are limited, but there's at least nature and trails which were deemed safe enough, right? So, and quite frankly and scientifically, Dan, they always have been safe enough during COVID. The fact that, there was restrictions about people could do outside, to me, scientifically and logically, seemed like a really far stretch. I understand how certain precautions were in place, and I get that, but to try and clamp down on the outdoors was wild to me. And it's like, wow, that's like what we're born out of. We're made out of the dust of the outdoors, and we need it, as you said earlier, to interact with our immune system so we can be stronger and healthier. So before I digress too much, 2020 saw the big spike of people exploring that for the first time. The trails were insanely busy.
Yeah, the park passes and things like that.
Yeah.
Like 2020 was the first year I ever went to Provincial Park, so that was because of COVID. Because
oh, really? Cool.
Yeah, can't do this, that, or the other. Almost impossible to leave the country without having to stay in a hotel room or, room for 2 weeks at a time on the way back. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely true. 2020 must have been a spike.
It was, because that was a limited time. And then I know we did this roller coaster of lockdowns, restrictions, closing, opening, but nothing was quite as hard as early in mid-2020. So some people were allowed to, for lack of better words, get back to their old hobbies pretty quickly, like, hockey came back, or soccer came back. Or
they all figured out their policies, they figured out their, their social distancing, whatever they could do as safe as possible.
And then so I feel like what happened is, even though that graph went down in terms of how many people are out visiting our trails in insane numbers, like numbers I've never seen before, and take it from a guy who spent his whole life on the trails here. I don't miss a beat, and I've never seen anything quite that busy. I've seen a long weekend on the occasional summer before COVID. You're like, oh, the gorge parking lot's nearly full. You know, gorge parking lot on a crappy spring weekend in 2020 would have that parking lot overflowing. Then you get parking issues, then you had rescue issues, and then you had emergency services that couldn't get into the gorge. Because now you also got this theme happening with people who normally haven't tried hiking out, and it's wonderful that they're out there and going for it finally, maybe for the first time in their life. But they're going into the gorge in flip-flops, or you know, they're getting lost in DeQ Falls, and you know, or they had a wipeout, and then emergency services can't get to them. It was a wild trend to really like watch that all unfold. And now, full circle, where we are now, I would say we're almost back to pre-COVID hike busyness levels on the trails, but we're hovering and plateauing, I would dare say forever, a little bit higher now. Okay. I think people have discovered nature for the first time in a big way, and now they're like, hey, this is a healthy, fun, and affordable hobby. I dig this, and I'm going to continue to be outdoorsy with my family. People from the GTA also discovered Niagara's natural areas for the first time in their lives. Because at one point, during COVID restrictions, like I said, we're like animals. Picture us like ants. So when they shone a light on Niagara and said, on Toronto, and said, this is a big city, it's COVID infested, etc., red to gray zone lockdown, everyone flocked to the orange zone of Niagara where they could enjoy themselves a bit more on a weekend, and then our trails got clogged.
Yeah, people were planning vacations based on the color system. So another thing that like
that's wild.
I wish we would just have like one rally where all at once we just come forward and let the governments just say, okay, color-coded system. We admit that didn't work well because people were like, okay, well, let's see. Stratford is only green right now. You can go sit in it. Okay, let's all go to Stratford. Everyone from Toronto goes down to Stratford, and then all of a sudden the high caseload's there. I mean, again, not a Dr. Couch, not a doctor, but not an epidemiologist. But I think there's something bad about incentivizing people to go to places that they can't go to in their own backyard and other places when they might be more likely to spread at that time.
Because you put rainbow colors on a map.
Yeah, people get excited. It's just like, green means go, right? You go there. So.
Red means danger, stop, fight.
Yes, get out of here.
And gray means dead zone.
Black means, if it's already dead, like, get going. So, that was another funny one. And I guess 2 points I wanted to take out of that. You said, here's something like hiking, going outside with the family, rather than, $10 a head to go to a movie. But that's probably more than that now. I haven't gone to a movie in a long time.
And it just changed when we were kids. No.
Yeah, unless it's Tuesday. And so, one thing that's interesting, did you see a lot of parks? There was only some, I believe, some Niagara parks that was it that they extended the hours that people had to pay for parking, or a lot of places had parking meters first brought. Is this true, or is this at a lot of different places?
There was all over the board, whether it was conservation authorities, municipally controlled parks, or even provincial and national parks in Ontario. All of them had this overarching and obvious theme of more control and regulation of how you visited the park, which I personally, again, was not a fan of, because I thought when you're out in nature and doing something so good for your mind and body and the world, I'd say, because you're connecting with nature and therefore you're more likely to respect it. That's a whole other tangent, but you don't want to be looking at your watch and being like, I got to get back in my car in 2 hours, and like, oh, we're getting close, and oh no, the app on my phone doesn't work to pay for parking, and this wasn't paid parking last year, or my phone's not charged, so now I can't pay at this machine, which wasn't here last year. And I felt like there's a lot more regulation. I have mixed feelings about regulation of things like paid parking, controlled, and group sizes, because I understand there's an aspect of you don't want to trample or overcrowd a certain sensitive ecosystem.
Yeah, so you're putting out like a lottery in a sense, or putting out like a limit or anyways.
Exactly, and you don't want to, have too many people down there for safety reasons as well, as far as like injuries and just sheer numbers goes. I get it, right, in that regard. But then there's also a few spots particularly where I thought to myself, like, this does not need to be so like tightly regulated. Like, this is nature. Everything else in the world is shut down without a question or a vote about it. Give people nature. Like, come on, right?
Yeah. Something's got to give.
Yeah. And I remember one time I wrote an article for the Not a Local, our local paper in town here, and this is in early COVID, and it just was bizarre to me. All of a sudden, at the Niagara Gorge and the Whirlpool, for example, on Niagara Parks Commission land, there's paid parking in lots that never used to be. So as a local, you felt kind of screwed. And someone's probably listening, if they listen to this and they go, oh, but it's just like $2 or $10 or whatever it is, or oh, just buy the pass. But
yeah, those little disincentives add up and say, what, screw it, I'm staying home.
Bingo. You know what you got, and that's part of the human psychology condition. Sometimes it's that little, and it may be little, extra step or extra thing to tick off where you go and do it. I remember, quote, the good old days, also known as 2019, where I could say right after this podcast, hey Dan, let's just hop in my vehicle, drive to the gorge, park. Now you need to make sure you have a form of payment available, or you have to have an app on your phone in some cases to use an app on the parking machine. It's like, and if you're a family who's struggling economically, it sounds silly, but that $5 parking or whatever might be a little, again, it
adds up.
What's the word to use?
Disincentivized.
Yeah. And it does add up, and I think we've all been guilty of it. It's like, hey, Dan, go check out this website. It's totally awesome. Okay, Owen. And then you log on, and now you have to create an account.
Yeah.
And now you have to verify via email.
And
then it's like, nope, I've lost it. And again, it sounds like a silly excuse, but I think humanly we all have it, and that applied to nature. It just became a bit more of that little headache, that not so simple aspect to get out, and I think that rubs some people the wrong way. Me personally, I understand that, there's liability involved with the Parks Commission, the Conservation Authority, municipalities. I totally respect that. But I think it went a little too far during COVID. And to me, again, whole conversation tangent, it's just symbolic of all the control and regulations over everyday aspects of your life, normal things that you never thought needed to be controlled or regulated. Well, now it's even in nature to an extent. And to me, that's really mind-boggling. Mind you, the 2 places I went today for my tours, you just get to do the good old show up, put on your boots and go.
Yeah.
Which is really refreshing, I think, for my guests, but also just anybody. Yeah.
Well, this is always interesting. It reminds me of the separation of state and church.
Yep.
And it's almost like there should be a written separation of state and land. And you probably know this better than me, but I know that there's some states or some other jurisdictions that are a lot better with just saying this land is public land, you don't have to pay a penny, you've already just being a resident of this country or state are able to go and hike. And so it seems like there's a trend where that's going away.
In all fairness, Southern Ontario, even before COVID times, was never exactly set up in that way, because most of Southern Ontario, as you're aware of, is private property, right? And that's just the way this area of the world has developed. Something like 95% of Niagara region, or the peninsula's landmass, is private property. So that's already
include roads, because that's huge. It must be besides roads.
I never thought about that actually, but more or less, I would think it's talking outside of roads.
Yeah, even still, now that's just another silly thing.
Yeah, but it'd be cool one to look up and clarify. But I do know for a fact it's upwards of high 90s, and that makes sense. Everything around here, that field across the road, this is yours, that's theirs.
The road is public, I'm quite sure. So that might be the 5%.
There you go. Yeah. But yeah. All kinds of interesting trends and themes, right down from how many people visited the trails, how they visited the trails, and again, mixed feelings on it, because there's more people out there respecting and getting to know nature and doing healthy things for themselves in the world. But then I also saw some very sensitive and once upon a time more secretive, locally significant ecosystems that got discovered, and then someone blew it up on Instagram or something, and then all of a sudden it's popular, and then there's garbage there. And then there's more people showing up there, and then you stop seeing this animal there, or whatever the case might be, right? So, and even for me as a tour guide, I'm actually very meticulous and picky about how I make my social media posts. Because, for example, yesterday I found a very rare species of salamander on my tour, and I won't even say it on here, I can tell you after, but just, you'll see what I'm getting at. I don't want everybody to know where that spot is, and then have hundreds of boots trampling through there to get to it, and then leaving garbage out there, and the next thing people having bonfires and ripping ATVs through there. Nothing against any of those things, but that's what naturally happens next, as I've seen. And I've seen a lot of local secret spots. For example, the Queenston Caves? Yeah. That was more of a locals hangout, I find, or found when we grew up. Yeah. And now, my buddy Dave Tebbett, and I don't know if you know him and I went up there a few months ago. Time warp, I think it was a few months ago. But anyways, we basically had this kind of epiphany and discussion. There's always been the odd, and I don't condone this, but there's always been the odd broken bottle there, maybe a piece of garbage, or someone left a flip-flop there, whatever, okay. But now it can be just totally trashed. And you can tell it's been visited and frequented more. The quarry behind it is being developed, and they push dirt and rock and soil right up to the edge of those caves. And it's just this whole concept. We looked at each other, right across the table, and we're just man, the joke was, Toronto has officially made it all the way around the bend, and this is the sign that it's here. Yeah. I'm not saying that's just Torontonians visiting there for the first time, but it's this concept of the Toronto bubble and Southern Ontario is growing so intensely, man, and it's now starting to show up in places that it used to not. Am I lucky to know where some of those local kind of hidden gems are? Yep. And to be honest, Dan, I don't even take people on tours to a couple of my favorite spots because I want it to remain sensitive.
Well, it's funny, Yeah, it's in the age of Instagram that things get discovered and shared like crazy. Like, I bet you, if even with all the crazy economic development of the province and a lot of the growth being pushed in this direction and people discovering Niagara, even effects from COVID, a lot of people wanting to leave more urban areas and come down to these more rural areas like Niagara. I still think that it's really Instagram's that big driver. Instagram's that reason why things are so discovered. And actually, yeah, this may be a good time. So what have you got there?
This is always a good time when we hang out. Yeah. What do I got here? So funny enough, I was on my tours today, and I was out in South Niagara at Wainfleet Bog and Willoughby Marsh. And as you and I were talking, I like to have a nice local beer. I like the casual style of hanging out and having these podcasts with you, Dan. So it was my turn because last time you picked up the tab getting us some
Silversmith
or Silversmith. I think you have one of each.
Yeah, I must have.
Yeah.
We can always check the record, but
exactly.
Local Niagara-on-the-Lake brewers.
This one, though, is from Breakwall Brewing Company in Port Colborne, right in downtown Port Colborne on Clarence Street, I believe. And I just thought, I'm rarely out that way in South Niagara unless it's for a tour. And I thought, let's stop in here, and I grabbed this nice little 6-pack. What do we got? A nice American Pale Ale. Good old 5.5% to extra warm me up a little bit after a day of being out in the cold.
Yeah.
I mean, you were running indoors. I was slogging around outdoors. I think we both earned our beer, though.
Yeah, training Soviet style.
Yeah.
And just for a disclaimer, if we're not sponsored by anyone, this is the most low-budget podcast you could probably ever find, if you have found it. Yeah, let's see. It's nice, too. I've got my Silversmith glass. You've got your Brimstone glass.
Brimstone's nice, too, yeah.
What's funny is I always confuse the two. Silversmith here in Virgil, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario, and then you've got Brimstone Brewery down in Ridgeway, Fort Erie, Ontario. And what's funny is they're both brew houses. They both used to be in churches.
Yeah, good point, actually.
Yep, they're both in like downtown little areas. I'm curious which one came first, actually. I mean, this is one. Oh, my glass actually says established 2011. I'm just curious. Does yours say when it was established? Which one do you think came first?
I believe, to be honest, do not quote me on this. This is a totally 50-50 guess, but I feel like Brimstone came first because I remember being just of age, like 19, and going to Brimstone to see local concerts.
Because the Sanctuary
is attached to it, right? Yeah. And so Great Big Sea played there, and they opened for a band that was once upon a time composed of a bunch of local guys in Niagara-on-the-Lake here called Theater Crisp.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I should say, if I didn't say that correctly, Theater Crisp opened for them. Super cool. I remember going there of age, and then I feel like Silversmith kind of crept in slowly after that, but we'll have to look that up. Either way, we're blessed in the Niagara region. To tie this in with my tourists, we have the best biodiversity of plants and animals of arguably anywhere in the country, let alone the province. And we also have the best diversity of friggin' beers, man. Like, we are lucky to be here. So many options of how you can quench your thirst in Niagara. Isn't that great?
Yeah, water, and then all the beers.
Oh, yeah, water.
Yeah, no, it's...
Shout out to water. Sponsored by water.
Yeah, and then funny, too, so Breakwall, I wonder when they opened. But yeah, it's kind of cool on this beer can. They actually have a picture of, like, I don't know what that's called. Is it a big flour mill that's next to the...
It's a giant mill, and it's based off of the incredible Shrinking Mill, which this is actually the title of the beer. Have you ever experienced the Shrinking Mill?
No.
What? Man, this is a great... Everyone listening, check this. It's one of Port Colborne's quirkiest but most fascinating attractions. And it can be done for free from the seat of your car. So what you do is you drive on, I believe it's Lakeshore Road or Lakeshore Drive. It is a Lakeshore Road, though, in downtown Port Colborne. And as you're driving towards this mill, there's a weird optical illusion based on the way you're looking at, where it looks enormous, like the biggest, most industrial, monster building you've ever seen. And then over the course of about 30 seconds, as you drive closer to it, it's just like an optical illusion. It just shrinks, and then all of a sudden you pull up and you're like, that's like not that big at all. It's really cool.
You got catfished by it.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So it's one of those funny things, and the locals know about it, and that's why I think this is very cool. Like local. I bought it for the title. Yeah, basically. I was like, I know about the Shrinking Mill because I've experienced that quite a few times.
That's good marketing.
It's a neat optical illusion. Next time you're in Port Colborne, just ask one of the locals which road you have to drive on. The experience is free from your car. How cool is that?
Yeah.
No app required, no surcharge.
No paid parking required. Yeah. It's cheaper than going on the parkway.
Exactly.
And what's that sweater? Trail of Life. What is that? 2014. Looks like it was like an old...
It's an old... Yeah, it's got my old business name on it, too.
Oh, yeah. Owen's Biophilic World.
Yeah, you got it. I just wear these on my tours. I just like the logo more than anything. But this was created when I thru-hiked the Bruce Trail in 2014. So all the sponsors on the back. Quick one for the camera, you can't read it, but there's a big list there. Yeah. And those are all the sponsors. They each sponsored a day of that 37-day adventure. And basically, I just have tons of these long sleeves in the spring. I like to wear them. I like the green and black look. And it's just something to wear on a tour, basically. It's not my official tour shirt, but me being the tour guide, sometimes I wear like just the wackiest sweaters, whatever. I can dress how I want out there as long as I'm comfortable. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, well, you definitely got some layers I can see going on too. So
totally.
I guess it's the best if you're outside and like weather can change, temperature changes as you're going out.
Especially in the spring, man. You can get caught off guard. Yeah.
Rather than just a t-shirt and a parka.
Yeah. No. Oh, it's funny because even working for the school board, I see it more at the school board because I just simply see more students Monday to Friday and a wider age group too. But they can be emailed about it. The teacher can tell them about it. I can tell them 4 times about it when they arrive at the building. Hey, if you're dressed inadequately today, and Dan, I want you to rewind your brain back to prepubescent Dan and Owen, grade 8 boys. Okay, grade 7, 8 boys. Worst age group. They want to dress to be cool outside. Yeah. And just to be clear, not worse as in fun. They're a lot of fun, but worse for dressing every time. Yeah. And it's just so funny because you can look them in the eye and say, "See your shoes? See that puddle? There's like 100 puddles like that today. Do you want warm feet? Do you want your shoes to remain white? I'm good. No, I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Okay, last call. No, I'm still good." And then they go out there and they're just like slogging through.
Yeah. That guy came out with a worse experience. Like I was saying before, if you're unprepared, well, that's why we have people that offer tours that can actually explain these things ahead of time and give those disclaimers and prevent soggy toes and things like that.
Yeah, no, we like soggy toes, but it's the reality at work. And just imagine, like, it's funny in that position, as you can imagine, because you see all the age groups and you kind of find yourself quietly reflecting in your head, whether it's kindergarten to grade 3, grade 8, or grade 12. You're looking at these kids and going, oh, that was totally like me at that age, or that was totally like so-and-so at that age, or see how these boys or these girls are behaving? I remember exactly what that is all about, and I know what they're up to right now, and it's kind of a fun reflection of like yourself almost.
Yeah.
And it's cool. That's like an unwritten value of the job that I really appreciate. It has nothing to do with nature. It's just human observation. And when people are outside in nature, I think you see them in their rawest form. There's no pretense, other than apparently looking cool with your nice shoes in a swamp. But
yeah, well, that's like they say. It's like it's in emergencies that you can really see like true people, because you can see who's gonna like. Do you remember on The Office when they had that fake emergency? I think Dwight started a fire in a garbage can, and everyone started screaming. Like you saw Michael pushing people over, running out. You had some people panicking and trying to I think Oscar's climbing through the ceiling. Angela's trying to get her cats out. So she's like, you see who cares for others, who's just out for themselves, who's calm, who's rational, who's freaking out, I think Stanley had a heart attack. Like,
yeah.
I mean, hey, I guess we learned both the value or the health of Stanley's heart in an emergency. It's when you really find out. So same thing with nature. When you're out there and you're caught without your cell phone service, maybe you pretend to be the smart person, but until you can't ask Google, what the capital of Italy is.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be.
But even think about going back to the past 2 years, especially in 2020, I found, and beyond too, a lot of people in an emergency or perceived emergency, their true colors, come on how they react. And I saw people, including those closest to me, who when fear hit, and I will never discredit or bash fear. Fear is a very primal and very scary feeling for people to have. So at no point during the past 2 years would I ever think it's correct for someone to say, "Ha, they were scared." That's to me that's rude.
Yeah.
All right, but we can also acknowledge though how those people reacted, because I know people when they got scared, they felt like they lost control because the world was so crazy and disoriented at the snap of the fingers. And when people lose control, I found, Dan, they're the ones who try to suddenly start controlling other things that are immediately within reach, and that can sometimes be you. That can be someone close to them. And I saw a lot of that. And then I saw people who said, well, I'm told it's pouring rain outside every day, but every time I step outside, it's just sprinkling. And I've done this for 2 years. I'm done. And to see the contrast of how people behaved in this, to me, was psychologically so fascinating. It was really, like, psychologists, professional ones, I'm not. Kind of like you said, you're not Dr. Fauci, I'm not either. I'm not a professional psychologist either, but I really tried hard over the past 2 years to gently observe without ever picking a side. Did I poke the bear sometimes, admittedly, to get conversations out of people? Because I was just curious what people really thought and why they thought it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to grow up one day and have kids, and I'm going to have to explain to my kid, people think like this in the world. You may not agree with it, you may not like it per se, but you just got to be prepared for and respectful of the other mindsets that exist around you. And as you said, like there's so many items in life. Nature can do it, but COVID definitely did the past 2 years. Brings out your raw person. How do you react under pressure, fear, the unknown, stress, and everyone does it differently. And I'm sure we don't have to name anybody, but I'm sure you have people in your life who may have surprised you, for better or worse, right? And that's totally okay. I think we all now full circle in this conversation, but we need to practice a bit of like forgive and forget, because nobody knew what to do.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's again comes back to that Monday morning quarterbacking. I think it's what they call it. When, and there's definitely things that okay, we probably did wrong. I remember panic buying at one point and buying tons of just random bars of food. And
How much toilet paper did you get?
Not too much. that was okay. I mean, hey, worst case, we
just grab a squirrel, man.
Yeah, we live in nature. Be a man. Use an acorn. But so definitely, I just wish that we could acknowledge these things. I'll acknowledge, yeah, I bought so many random nut bars and things like that probably didn't have to. But yeah, it's I think just we learned a lot about our leaders. We learned a lot about ourselves. We learned about our neighbors. One thing is, human nature is pretty consistent with how it's been for the last, 100,000, 10,000 years since we've been Homo sapiens. And you look at even the Soviet Union and how there was an incentive to rat your neighbors out if they said something bad about the government, because then if you didn't and you were caught and you knew about it, then you're going to jail or you might be killed. Yeah. So there was a lot of that I think came out of people where it seemed hey, I'm staying inside and I'm not spreading. But I see my neighbor went to a party, and it's because, and there was the talk was because some people went out, we have to keep locked down, and it seemed that
rhetoric just spins in a hamster wheel, man,
and it makes you hate your neighbor more and more, and it just leads to more division and more screw you and more I'm going to do what I want because they're doing what it just things break down. But I think it's the momentum that no one could stop and say, hey, let's all just give this a second. Because it's, oh no, you're not doing the thing. You're not closing us down. You must hate us. You are a bad actor. And I just wish it, and again, it's, I feel if this were to happen again today, of course, we'd hopefully have learned a lot in the last 2 years.
Yeah, hopefully.
But should we see some alternative universe where that same thing happened at the same time, COVID happening in, at the beginning of 2020, is there some random distribution that oh, maybe if it happened again randomly, it would have gone differently, or is it just that this is how things would have gone? You look at too a lot of different rules that came into effect that seem to be permanent now that maybe there was always an interest of to put my conspiracy hat on. You look at how even
I can't find any tin foil for you
somewhere.
Sorry. Yeah.
Well, we got some wood.
Yeah,
a lot of we're in the wood shop.
Yeah.
So there's conspiracy that the government wanted to have something like Arrive Can, where they have just another checkpoint for whenever. And I mean, the data's already there, so I don't this again where it's tinfoily, and I haven't looked into this obviously. But how now, even though you don't need a test anymore to come back into Canada to avoid a quarantine,
as of a couple days ago,
as of April 1st, so 2 days ago, you still have to use Arrive Can. And I hope a lot of people, hopefully at least one person learns this from hearing this, because when a few months ago they were allowing people to go back and forth to the States without getting a test as long as you were gone less than 72 hours.
And you had to be vaccinated.
Yeah, fully vaccinated through the entire thing, and we can get to that too. But what's funny is that a lot of people didn't know they still had to use Arrive Can when the testing requirements were dropped. So you had people that were being threatened with $5,000 fines, maybe more.
Because there's not an app on their phone.
Yeah,
that's mind-blowing.
There's a lot of people who drive today, who use cars, who don't have a smartphone or don't have a data plan or don't know how to use a smartphone. I mean, Nokia, I think they're still making phones, or people that have 20-year-old phones that I feel bad for anyone that came over and wasn't able to use that.
Or you're an 80-year-old man or woman who just wants to go over the border to see their grandkid or something.
Haven't been able to in 2.5 years, and then that happens, and so people were getting threatened with fines and threatened with being locked up for 2 weeks at their destination.
As healthy adults, it's wild.
Yeah. And what's crazy is, so even now where they're at a point where I could be wrong. I think every province has dropped most of their mandates by now related to COVID. But federally, you still have to use Arrive Can when you come to Canada. Even though the states, I mean, we could argue this as a separate convo, but the states, their policy is, come on over. You have to be fully vaccinated, and they just say they could ask you to say, okay, we want to check that. The same way that they can say, I want to check what's in your trunk.
Yeah, or could you have a criminal record and look you up?
Yep. So they they say, hey, if you want to come into our country, then you are forfeiting certain rights and you're agreeing to our conditions.
Yeah.
And fair enough. We make even pre 9/11, you gave up certain liberties.
Absolutely.
To say, fair enough, search me as you go through. But what's just interesting is now coming back to Canada, you still have to use ArriveCan, even though we're saying that we're accepting the risk of you coming in and not needing to have a test. We're accepting the risk that you might be positive with COVID coming back.
Yeah.
As long as you're vaccinated and you use the ArriveCan app to tell us when you're coming, then all is good and happy. And what I've heard some officials say is that it's because they want to be able to predict ahead of time which bridge is going to get the traffic. So you put in ArriveCan, which border crossing.
But what if you change your mind? What if you're like, oh, Peace Bridge is 60 minutes, I'm going over to Queens and Lewiston?
They might question, so I see you're inconsistent. So, just some more things. But the biggest thing that's interesting, so if that, and then maybe there's more than that, more to that, and hopefully we'll get more information as time goes by. But what I've heard is that it's to make it easier to plan for when people are going to be arriving at the border. But the problem is, having ArriveCan means we can't just take the attestation, we believe you, that you're vaccinated and that this is your trip coming back. It's now this thing where they have to do this confirmation with every person. So it's almost doing a virtual search of every person when you come over now, requiring them to do this. So even though the number of CVSA workers, from what I understand, has not increased with the use of ArriveCan now, they are still same amount of people now requiring to have to check this, where a lot of people are very slow with using this app if they know how to use it or know about it at all. And there's been certain cases where there might be 4 or 5 people in a vehicle that are each having to use their own phone for ArriveCan. You can use ArriveCan for multiple people. I'm not sure if there's a limit on that. But so what's happening is now you have the CVSA person having to not just check the passport of each person and have that independent declaration, where are you from, where are you coming from, where do you live. You now must also check, let me see your ArriveCan, let me see your ArriveCan, yours. You got to hand phones to the people. What if your phone locks and you got to toss them the password back and forth? A lot more contact, may I mind you, because now you're taking all these CBSA people are now having to. I don't know if they have a barcode they can use. Might be a little less contacting. But now they've got to take these people's cell phones. And I've heard in some cases it could take 40 minutes to go through if each person's got their own separate ArriveCan to process, depending if you got a full load of people. Whereas in the past it was, here's the stack of passports, scan, talk to everyone. If you assume no risk, then come on through. It could be done in a minute. Those days are gone. So it's going to be really interesting.
It may never be the same as far as like post 9/11 for obvious reasons, and now with COVID, I think the borders of the world in general, not just U.S., Canada, but are going to get tighter and trickier as time goes on. Maybe still open flow in the big scheme of things. To me personally, it won't be open flow until you can allow unvaccinated back and forth too. That's just my take on it. So I wouldn't say it's still fully open, but it's going to certainly be. There's going to be the extra step. You and I grew up in an age where passports didn't even exist, man. Like, isn't that wild?
And as kids, we didn't have driver's license.
That's long ago.
This your kid? Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay.
Our parents used to go over the border to the States for a night with all their friends, get rowdy at some bar, and as long as the driver coming back was sober, there could have been 10 people in the back of that van without a seatbelt hammered, and they said, okay, just get them home safe. Welcome back to Canada. Done. Could you imagine if we tried that?
Oh my gosh.
That'd be a wild social experiment.
We'd be arrested on the way over. We'd be like, wait a second. Now, you don't have a passport? Or you don't, you know what I mean? Like, just all those things.
So this is an interesting question. I want to hear your take on this, because, again, I always appreciate how our conversations snowball. And this actually does, to me, have to do with, like, human connectivity to nature and our bodies being, autonomous and one with the earth. As you know, and everyone knows, we've become more dependent on technology, yada, yada, yada. Do you think things like, for example, the ArriveCan app, they briefly, I believe they experimented, if you want to call it that. Governments around the world experimented with this concept of giving humans a QR code for a brief period of time. Do you believe we're entering or transitioning into a stage where having a phone on you is now not only just a socially expected thing, it's going to become a mandatory thing quickly. Like having this electronic device that has nothing to do with your feet, your head, your eyes, your hair, your balls, but it's basically attached to you now, and you can't do ordinary life things without it. Do you think we're heading that way where we're going to be hyper dependent on the phone, which is now more than just things for phone calls?
I think there is something to that, but I think a lot of it's overblown. And so to start off with, I think that for the longest time, there has been a government record of you existing. And that's why we have birth certificates.
Yep.
And it's also why we have death certificates. So there is a constant count that's ongoing, whether it's from the local level, provincial level, federal level, through the census. There's always an accountability or an accounting of people in a country to see how many people are here, how many people are there. But what's evolved is not just saying, yes, we know a gentleman named Owen Bjorgan was born at this time in this place, and he's existing until our bureau receives the death certificate saying he no longer exists.
Yeah.
But and not even just, we've had the technology and the ability to connect that data of your birth with your address, with where your province has said that you live on your debit card. To, we can go into even deeper of like what private companies have on you, like Visa or MasterCard or whoever you use for banking. So there's already a lot of data points on people. So I don't see it as anything new. I just see this as an additional step, an additional grabbing of data and grabbing of data is power. More data you have, more information you have, the more power you have. So I'm not worried about and I know it's something people can get in their head about having a QR code of them, and it is creepy, especially when some people are nuts. They actually get tattoos of their QR code for their COVID vaccine.
Oh, I've seen T-shirts printed too, and
yeah,
I'm like, not a chance I'm ever going to wear that.
Yeah,
no,
like I don't want anyone to
teach
scan
their
this
own,
and
but no.
down. Like, hey, I know your middle name. I know where you got your Pfizer and your Moderna shots. Like, I don't want that advertised out there. Just I don't want people to know when I went to the doctor for a prostate exam or for whatever it might be.
Good thing you told me about that before the camera
started. Oh god, are we recording? But so I think, it's definitely creepy. I don't even like iTunes. You go to click and accept, you got 1,000 terms on there. It's like, I don't know if I sold my soul on there or not.
Are they burrowing like a bug through a log where they're getting deeper in that log of your life, in that fine print somewhere?
Yeah,
because we've all scanned over the fine print, right?
Oh yeah, it started with iTunes. Our iPods are out to get us.
Yeah, but I think what you said there was totally valid. There was already this idea that the government knows who you are and can keep track of you in some ways. So I think it was a stretch when people, and I get where they're coming from, because it was an unknown and freaky kind of creepy time.
Yeah, and when you look at the way our governments have been putting out information, it hasn't been in the best, here's some...
And so, I guess to refine my question, though, what are your thoughts on having the thing literally physically on you at all times and that being mandatory?
I don't think it's... I don't like anything that's mandatory, really. I understand there's certain things, like it's mandatory for you to have...
it's not charged, or it's not in your pocket today, now you can't do this, what was once an ordinary thing. That's where I'm kind of getting at.
There's certain things I don't get upset with being mandatory, such as seatbelt laws, because you and I both pay taxes that pay into emergency medical services, and the less people wearing seatbelts, the more fatal accidents there are, the more demand there is, a need for EMS services, which puts a strain on the whole society. So there's things like that I totally get and I understand and I comply with, but I think if it's unnecessary, then I don't think it's something that should be mandatory. And this is a whole nother argument we can get into, is to say, was it ever necessary, or was it ever a good idea, as a general term as good can be, or as subjective as good can be, to disallow certain people with certain medical conditions or lack of medical treatment into certain places. But I think it's just it's
kind of a wild new precedence,
Yeah, it's definitely. And a lot of people will say that this is the next step towards a social credit system, because there was a government order to do a certain thing, and those that didn't do that certain thing are now disallowed from doing certain things by order of government. So that is a very slippery slope. Some would say, well, we've had these for a very long time. Look at things like you must have immunization records for schools to be able to go to certain schools. And there's certain things where it comes down to a very similar situation to the seatbelt, where it's like, I get it. Again, not an epidemiologist. You and I both depend on, even if you and I spent the next 10 hours reading through peer-reviewed journals, we're trusting the scientists and those that reviewed their work, and we can take. As we do as humans, we take everything that we can, with try and understand who the sources are, what the purpose is of the work, what was the funding, what was the incentive to write this a certain way. But I think for certain things, it sounds like the polio vaccine was a good idea, because polio sounds horrible, and I'm glad a lot of people got the vaccine. Not polio. I'm glad they got the vaccine. Were able to nearly eradicate polio. So there's certain things like that where it's, it seems very demonstrated that this was a good thing and that we were able to avoid people having polio. But I guess you look at certain things where some cases people may have gotten vaccinated and thought, now I am good to do the risky behavior. And there might be some people who might have 3 or 4 comorbidities that...
And let's remember, risky in this context means normal. Yeah. Like socializing, going indoors with a bunch of people.
Yeah. And so you might have someone that has diabetes or is overweight or has asthma or other kind of issues that maybe they got vaccinated and now they feel like, okay, I can go out into the public, but you can still get COVID from someone who's vaccinated. I don't know. That was the big argument at first, was that you're less likely to spread it if you're unvaccinated. But if you actually take a step back and look from a social standpoint, you might be more likely to say, hey, I feel safe, I'm going to go socialized if I am vaccinated, and that might lead to a higher risk of you getting COVID and potentially dying from it. We don't have a Jamie here to pull up all the stats on what's worked and what hasn't, but to take it all back to your original question about having to have it at all times, I wonder, like, are there certain jurisdictions where you have to have a driver's license on you? Like, imagine you're going for a walk somewhere and you don't have your wallet, and a crime happened, and they're looking for a guy, and they think his name is, Dave Matthews, and they
great musician.
Yeah, they go to pick you up, and they ask you, and they say, hey, we need to check your ID. And because you don't have your ID, they might say, okay, you're a person of suspect, we're going to take you in now because we can't identify. Like, I don't know. There's certain cases like that where it's like, I don't know, maybe because they couldn't prove you are Dave Matthews, they should just leave you be, like, unless you start playing Crash Into Me or something
I think, yeah. Well, by the way, Dave Matthews, on that note, pun, is criminally underrated. He's real good. I love that guy. But I think, to me, in my mind, Dan, the line is drawn when it's technology versus a hard copy piece of paper or a card. Like, to me, that's kind of the thing, because a card can't run out of batteries. You can't track a card with a satellite, you can't...
Well, you can, but hopefully not all cards.
Yeah, maybe a MasterCard something, but, like ID and stuff. I mean, there's that fine line between organic and electronic, and I think, to use your term, it's a slippery slope and we become hyper-dependent on the electronics. Let's say there's some kind of... I'm going wild here for a moment, but let's say there's a solar flare and or some epic scale hacking of electronics from a foreign government to, like, in the form of, like, a terrorist electronic attack, and that's a reality that can happen. Dude, cheers to this. I bet you in our lifetime we will experience an electronic hack that will wreck us in our lifetime. Like, it'll be hard to deal with from another foreign adversary. But anyways, like, electronics are tangible, and they can be canceled, they can be deleted, they can be tracked, they can, and I think that's kind of a weird concept to have a hyper dependency on. Whereas good old hard copy is just good old hard copy. It's organic, right? Like, it's a weird one. And I remember, actually, this is something I wanted to ask you about too, because it would be like a follow-up to the last conversation we have. You seem more well-versed in this by me as a long shot. We talked about cryptocurrency and the idea of, like, these kind of online digital currencies. Now, in the contentious subject of the time, trucker is now a worse word than fucker by most people's standards. I've seen people get real fired up about that word. But anyways, no matter where you lie on that issue, we won't get into the issue itself, but what I found very interesting was all that money, something like 15 or 18 million dollars was raised by ordinary people and foreign investments as they learn, but basically people raised money independently through cryptocurrency and online funding, and the government, I got gloves on so I can't do it, the government snapped their fingers and said, we don't like this, we're going to turn it off. Do you think that sets a kind of unusual precedence for the future? Because, okay, that was the trucker convoy. Again, we won't get into it maybe because everyone's got different opinions, but it's a whole other conversation. What a time to be alive, right? But what I took away from that is, no matter where you stand on the issue, let's just look at the logistics of the money part. Like, what's the next thing the government won't like that citizens are doing, and they're going to just cancel it or stop it or break it? What if you have an automated car one day, and the government owns it electronically or it's certified electronically, and you've been a very bad boy, Dan, according to the government, or you're a threat to them, oh, we're just going to turn your car off. Oh, we're just going to stop your bank. Oh, we're going to turn your cell phone off.
Well, it's so subjective, and that's the thing that's worrisome is, like...
So what are your thoughts on that?
It'd be simple enough if truckers were going out with hatchets and, like, killing people and, like, cutting people's heads off, then that's murder, and that's objective.
Shut them down.
We're ending life. We should stop it. Like, okay...
We can agree on that. Yes.
So I didn't see that in the CBC or CTV or Global or anything like that. So, like, there's certain things that are, like, very black and white. Like that. Okay, truckers should not chop people's heads off with hatchets. But it's a slippery, weird slope that could happen if you start to close off bank accounts and you start to, repossess things from people who engaged in that activity, or blacklisting people. Mm-hmm. This is all stuff that we've seen in the Soviet Union. All these things led to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. I'm no expert on that, just actually getting into the history of that now because of all the conflict going on in the world. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's dangerous. Like, here's a perfect example of why it's subjective. You had people from other political federal parties that were able to go out there and say, we support what you're doing, we support your right to protest and to demonstrate. I think it was a clear line that a lot of people said, okay, just don't block the bridges to the, in and out of the country. The Ambassador Bridge was the big one. But, like, we're okay with you blocking, or some people were okay with the blocking, at Rideau Street or right in front of Parliament Hill in Ottawa. But yeah, I think it's definitely a dangerous precedent that's been set. Because let's say, love him or hate him, like I've supported candidates of all stripes. Let's say the Conservatives get in soon and they decide, like, they're totally fine with the view of the truckers. But let's say they're totally against some other cause that maybe you don't like, that you're not on the same side as the Conservatives on, and they froze the bank accounts of people donating to Black Lives Matter or to whatever,
or people fighting climate or environmental related issues or something. Yeah, could be anything.
Yeah, well, and that's what's worrisome. It's like, so when it's like being done for subjective reasoning, it's where it can get a little bit ugly. And these things start out this way, and they have a way of just naturally snowballing. Like, it definitely can set a precedent, because it was never done, from what I understand. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's more out there on the history, but from what I understand, there has never been a moment in time where the government of Canada has frozen so many accounts at once.
And or invoked the Emergencies Act like that at a federal level.
Yeah. Not since Trudeau's father used the War Measures Act to roll some. I don't know if there's actually.
That was in Quebec, right?
Yeah. To roll in heavy equipment, heavy military equipment into. I'm not sure if it's Quebec City or Montreal or both. To just draw that presence there and to catch some of the people that were kidnapping Quebec politicians at the time.
That's wild.
Yeah, and then the only other times that those acts were called, from what I understand, is World War II, and I think I remember hearing this back in grade 10 history class, that World War I was actually, Canadian military was called on by the British government. I'm not sure at that time if it's the Queen or if it's the Prime Minister of England, but was able to call to say, Canada, you must fight in our war. In World War II, I think that's when, and could be completely wrong, I think that's when the War Measures Act was either drawn up or used to say, Canada, we ourselves, without a Prime Minister declaring, yes, let's go to war, let's go fight along our British friends over in Europe.
Yeah, it's a crazy kind of concept, right? Because it's like, and again, it comes back to the whole digital aspect of things. You can't physically get into that person's house and do it, maybe, but once money becomes this invisible kind of entity online, and you have a greater power at B that can shut it off. And correct me if I'm wrong, but again, you're into this a bit more than I am by knowledge standpoint, but nobody truly knows who owns, for example, like Bitcoin. Let's say that guy one day...
Nakamoto, the guy, no one knows who the founder is.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
And what about other cryptocurrencies? Is it like, do people know who owns the other brands? Is there still some more mysterious kind of...
Yeah, there's you can look
entities up there.
I think it's at Bitcoin, and I think that they basically set a name for the guy. Like, no one really knows, but I think they call him Satoshi Nakamoto. I believe they think he's a Japanese fella who started it. And there are other cryptocurrencies where they do actually know who the founder is. Ethereum is the second largest by market cap, by total amount of dollars that have been put into it. Yeah. And I forget the guy's name. I think he's from Russia. Interesting guy, interesting looking fella, and he's he's immensely wealthy, because I believe he does control the actual money supply of Ethereum too. So can you imagine having your own money printer?
Now,
and
imagine
I created this.
Where's that gray area now, right? Where it's like, let's suppose for some reason, for his own interest or something, a bigger global interest, maybe putting pressure on him, he decides this money that exists in thin air now no longer exists at all. Boop, press the button, and millions of people are fucked or something. Yeah. Like, and it could, it's a precedence. Like, I understand the idea of cryptocurrency, and I see the draw and attraction to it, but to me, very personally speaking, it kind of spooks me. Like, I can't see myself getting involved in it, because what if I got in so deep and it ran good for 5 years, 10 years, and then something happened? Also, you can't hack cash, but you can certainly hack something electronic.
Yeah, the thing
it's
with
kind of
the thing with Bitcoin I don't like is that So people say the reason why I like Bitcoin is because there's a finite amount of Bitcoin. So I'm not sure what the amount is, but there's some certain amount, like let's say it's like there's 27 million Bitcoin out there, and there can never be any more ultimately created. And that is why it is so great of a store of value, of a store of wealth. People put their money into Bitcoin thinking, well, it won't inflate away the way that Canadian or American or euros or Japanese dollars, Australian dollars can be printed away by the press of a button by their central banks. But what's interesting though, while Bitcoin might be finite, cryptocurrencies are not finite. There's millions of different cryptocurrencies. Like literally, there's Kanye coin, there's Dogecoin, there's
Dogecoin. I've heard of Dogecoin.
Shiba Inu coin, all these ripoffs of Bitcoin like Dogecoin. So that's the one thing is like there's an unlimited amount of those, and we can go even farther down that rabbit hole of talking about all the NFTs that people are selling any kind of a digital footprint.
That's so wild.
You could sell your first tweet, your second tweet, any tweet, and say you own the rights to say that you own this tweet that I did at this time. While it still sits on Twitter's server and I typed it 10 years ago, you own that. You can do with it what you will, which isn't much. You could pretty much sell it. You can print it off. I mean, someone else could still print it off. Like there's people getting into lawsuits because they have a NFT, which is a non-fungible token, a digital non-fungible token, which is basically, think of it as like a file, like a picture file on your computer of a certain thing. It could literally be a line of
picture of us.
Yeah, and then we could sell it as an NFT. This is the only one, or you can issue copies. You could say this is issue 1 of 100 of this NFT. But the problem is there's an infinite amount of NFTs. Like we can create 1 million from every thousandth of a second of a frame of this podcast could be a separate NFT. So that's where I think that the idea of the scarcity is it's not scarce. You can create an infinite amount. Things that actually have scarcity are things that there actually is a maximum amount of in the world, such as gold, silver, copper,
fossil fuels.
Well, anything that you can't synthesize. Like so, I mean, some people might argue that eventually we'll have the technology to be able to take atoms from this can and just using the protons, neutrons, and electrons, reshape them into the shape of a gold element. And
who knows?
Yeah, I mean, maybe
fool's
someday.
gold to a whole new level.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know how
fool's gold
diamonds,
from dog shit, man.
Yeah, I
it
don't
could
know how diamonds are made, and it's just carbon pressed against each other. Again, not a doctor, not a scientist. Do not ask me for medical advice. But it's I think that's the problem is like people try to think that Bitcoin is gold when it's really fool's gold because you can create it like, I mean, not that I'm a scientist by any way, but if I spent the next 10 years, I could probably learn how to create my own digital currency with its own stamps, with its own URLs for each unique Bitcoin or
Why do I picture you, of all people, in the best way possible, experimenting with it at least once?
That
I feel like I could
coin.
see you having a dabble in it. Being
that would be funny. Imagine I made, imagine I started with like, whatever the population is of Nodal from the latest census, like let's say 20,000 Dan coin or Nodal coin.
Dan coin.
Everyone starts with one, and you can trade them for whatever you want. But the thing is, the value of anything is based on the supply and the demand for that. Like to dumb it down, like any kind of stock. Let's say you had a stock that was at the beginning of the day worth $100.
Yeah.
When it goes on the market, it's selling for $100. If there is more people that want to sell it than want to buy it, then the price will have to go down until enough people say, yeah, I'd be willing to spend for that much. That the buyers will go up until the number of buyers equals the number of sellers, and that's how the price is determined. So it's the same with Bitcoin, that if there's more people wanting to buy Bitcoin than there are that want to sell it, the price will have to go up. If more people want to sell it than buy it, the price goes down. So what's interesting is you can't actually create anything with a Bitcoin. I can't make a gold necklace with a Bitcoin. I can't use Bitcoin in creating electronics.
Well, you can't go tomorrow to the Sand Trap and buy a burger with Bitcoin.
Well, I mean,
could that day come though? I don't know.
What a lot of companies do is they'll actually accept Bitcoin for payment. But what
they'll
do, what happens is they'll accept it, they'll sell it. Like so, the second you hand it to them, let's say your Bitcoin's worth 50 grand. You hand whatever it is. Like, let's say you're buying a car and it's 50 grand. Some dealers are at like there's coffee shops accepting Bitcoin. And what they do
here in Niagara,
I'm not sure about Niagara.
Have you seen it in real life?
Yeah, I've seen a bar.
Interesting.
The head shop in St. Catharines. I don't know if they still do, but they did accept Bitcoin for payment like pre 2017, before the big explosion in the price. But so what these companies will do is they'll accept the Bitcoin. Let's say you're buying a car for 50 grand, and just for simplicity's sake, a Bitcoin equals 50 grand. You hand that to me, the car dealer. I sell that on the open market right now for 50 grand. I pay my wholesaler the 50 grand or whatever I owe him for it. So people will accept it. It seems to be fairly common, but for whatever that dollar value is worth, the same way that some places might actually say, we'll pay you in gold if you come to us, and then what they do is the same thing. They might have a buyer, they sell it for that amount, and then they use that to pay their the cash from that sale for their electricity, their rent, whatever else.
This is a good way to explain this, and I appreciate you listening to this, because I admit I'm not well versed in that, and I've had a lot of wondering questions. At the end of the day, like I said, my biggest concern is the line between a more organic, hard type of money that's regulated versus something that's a little bit more new and unregulated and strictly digital. But even like you just explained that to me makes me feel like, oh yeah, like I see the sense of it. I can see how it could become popular, but then I'm wondering, when does that line get crossed? Now, speaking of lines crossed, I've had 2 beers and I really got to pee.
I think that might be a good time then to wrap this thing up. I think we've been going an hour. My laptop
has it been that long already? That's awesome, man. Always love chatting with you.
It's still on, but yeah, and one last final thing, because I know you got to pee, is that a lot of central banks around the world are actually trying to create their own digital currency right now. So there would be a digital Canadian dollar, a digital euro, and
still freaks me out.
Well, yeah,
again, because snap their fingers. We don't like what you're doing. We're gonna turn it off.
Here's the big thing: you don't like being tracked. You don't like your transactions being tracked. You're not going to like this, because if let's say, we could do different services for money. So let's say you tap dance for an hour for me, and I
did
love
that
it
early this morning,
and I love it. So I say I'm going to give you $20, and then let's say I got to do some work around your house. I do some gardening. You pay me that $20 back. We can do this back and forth all day, 10 times doing different tasks, and that's actually adding to the GDP. But it's not being recorded. But if we used a digital dollar and I transferred 20 to you and you transferred 20 to me, 2 things that are sketchy. One thing, so it all gets accounted for and be automatically added to our GDP. So our GDP count would be so much easier to actually verify and be way more accurate. It'd be a lot less under the table things. But that's the thing. No more under the table transactions. Everything will be tracked and everything will be taxed.
Yeah. And and we're already kind of there with a lot of things in reality.
Oh, yeah.
Again, we come back to the whole
transaction, credit transaction.
I'm being tracked, kind of concern during COVID times especially. We're already being tracked, man. As long as you have this cell phone in your pocket, some higher power knows where you are and what you're doing, and they're listening.
Yeah.
Totally. That's not even a conspiracy theory. It's real. But it's just a weird... I think you and I, this is a good way to kind of wrap this up. And I'll wait to pee. I'll finish my beer. But, I don't know, man. I feel like our age group, but let alone this time of being alive for everybody, we're undergoing... The world's always in transition, but we're undergoing a huge transition, and we are going to start intermingling with technology in ways we probably knew were coming, but now it's actually starting to happen. And it's going to be, I think, me personally, a tumultuous transition, because there's going to be a lot of people who aren't going to like it. There's a lot of people who aren't going to want to get with the program, if you will. And there'll be some who are glad it's going to roll with the new features, the new punches, whatever. Like, okay, well, this is great, and I see the benefit of this too. And there will be benefits as well, don't get me wrong. But I don't know. Have you ever watched Black Mirror?
Oh, yeah.
That series in a nutshell. Anyone listening, watch Black Mirror and see how that show very accurately, in my opinion, depicts scenarios that we're already on the cusp of, and then what happens when you get over that tipping point of going too far with it. And that show, brilliantly, I might add, again, just my opinion, touches on everything from how the world works politically, to social issues, to human sexuality, to friendships and families, and how the world travels, the big brother government to citizen kind of relationship. And I thought that show was brilliant at showing these things are good until they ain't.
Yeah. I mean, hey, it's funny because you can look at vending machines. People could be upset with the automation. Oh, it took my job. I used to sell chips and Cheetos at the entrance to the store, but now, and I think it's something that has always been happening, but it is accelerating at a pace we will never have seen before. Just wait till self-driving cars take over all driving jobs. There's over a million
concept.
Over a million jobs that are just driving in the North America. It's probably millions, but it's well over a million.
Oh yeah.
So let's wait and see what happens. But yeah, I'm glad to be able to talk with you today, Owen. And
Dan, as always,
hope we can do this again soon.
Yeah, we waited too long, but until next time, thanks for hosting me in the wood shop.
Yeah, no worries. We're always looking for different locations. We'll get a real studio one day once we hit the first 1 million subscribers.
I don't know. You made a nice... I'm sitting on the nice bench that you made today, and you got some good work going here. You got some good work going with the podcast, and likewise, Dan. It's always a pleasure, buddy.
Yeah, it's been good. All right.
Yeah. All the best.
Thanks to everyone who stayed this late.
or early.
Yeah.